was the summer of 2014, and for my son's bar mitzvah present, just like many Jewish parents, we wanted him to bond with the Holy Land. Oh, it worked perhaps too well. My husband had stayed back at the hotel, and our friends, my son and I, had just stopped in a pharmacy.
Run to the bomb shelter, sweetie. Please hurry. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but the Israelis did. They're used to hearing these things. We ran to the back of the storeroom. It was a 12-foot by 24-foot windowless bomb shelter. My heart's pounding. Boom! Boom! I hear it and feel the percussion of the exploding bombs. I'm trying not to get sick. I look at my 13-year-old son and I think I'll never forgive myself if something happens to him.
That's an excerpt from a speech I gave to the Orange County Jewish Bar Association. It was the first, but not the last time we had to run to a bomb shelter. Our adventure and my transformation is also the subject of my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. There is no chapter in a parenting book on what to do when a war starts and you're on a family vacation. Think touring extraordinary and sacred sites mixed with cowering in bomb shelters. I'm still trying to get over the Jewish guilt of taking my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. The impact of being human targets helped me understand the plight of Israelis living like this, and it also made me want to work on peace. How Israel is often described on the news is not what I'd seen with my own eyes. And I felt Palestinian parents also preferred their children playing safely in their backyards. The missiles exploded just near enough to blow apart my world as I knew it, forever changing me. And you'd never recognize my life today with what it was like then. I believe I found my life's purpose. Hello, I'm Penny St, and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. Today we'll be speaking with Yuval Ben David of EcoPeace Middle East. EcoPeace Middle East is a unique organization that brings together Jordanian, Palestinian, and Israeli environmentalists. Their primary objective is the promotion of cooperative efforts to protect their shared environmental heritage. In so doing, they seek to advance both sustainable regional development and the creation of necessary conditions for lasting peace in the region. Yuval Ben David is the Investment and Entrepreneurship Officer in the Tel Aviv office of EcoPeace, working to harness the private sector towards a green and sustainable peace in the region. Originally from northern Israel, he grew up in Pittsburgh, studied history at Yale, and Middle Eastern Studies at Oxford. Before EcoPeace, he has worked on projects for the World Bank, the UN, and a cybersecurity startup. I'm excited to be speaking with you today, Yuval. Welcome.
Thank you, Penny. Nice to be here.
Yuval, how would you describe EcoPeace Middle East?
So EcoPeace, I mean, you described it very well. I mean, how I usually start off describing EcoPeace is actually in how we're organized. I mean, I think we're probably, I don't know if the only organization in the world, but certainly unique in that we're not an Israeli organization or a Palestinian organization or a Jordanian organization. We're an Israeli, Palestinian, Jordanian organization with 3 co-directors. I
feel like saying amen after that, you know?
Yeah.
So great.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, it's certainly, I mean, I think we practice what we preach, first of all, and we exemplify cooperation. You know, it's in our DNA as an organization from day one. And basically what it means is that I think the governance is very interesting, right? We have those 3 directors for every position. You know, we have people doing, working on the same things in the different offices. So I work on investments out of Tel Aviv, but I have colleagues in Amman and in Ramallah who work on this with me. So I sort of report both to a regional manager and a manager in Tel Aviv. And that makes life very interesting. And it means that day to day we're WhatsApping and collaborating and working with people on the other side as well. It doesn't even feel, maybe it's funny, I think sometimes when I tell people about my work, it sounds like really shocking, that you go to work every single day with people working in an office in Ramallah and Amman, but just the most natural thing in the world. So that's I think the really interesting thing about EcoPeace. It means that we work to, so we're an environmental organization, as you mentioned. The history, I think, is really interesting. It was founded back in the heyday of the Middle East peace process, as it was known back in the 90s. The new Middle East, if you remember, Shimon Peres talking about the new Middle East. And there was all this sort of talk of the economic development that would come on the heels of all the peace agreements and Israel normalizing its relations with its neighbors. And so it was actually founded back in '94 as a regional environmental organization to advocate for the environment, in the wake of all this, sort of untrammeled, unimpeded economic development, for example, hotel rooms, on the Dead Sea, things that would have really negative shared environmental impacts. And so that was the original sort of purpose, intent. And then very quickly, the region being what it is, we were back to another round of violence, and the peace process stalled. And sort of our ability to keep on cooperating and working together on these shared environmental concerns sort of created, I'd say, pioneered this field that's now known as environmental peace building, right? The sort of using the environment as an entry point to building the conditions for peace, right? Because the environment is not something that knows or recognizes human or political borders. I think in the Middle East, something like at least every country or every two countries, or how do I phrase this? Every country has at least one shared aquifer, I think, in the region, like water aquifer. I think about 60% of the water ecosystems in the region cross borders or cross boundary. And these are obviously, or drying region, climate change is happening about twice as fast here as it's happening in other parts of the world. Heating very fast, drying very fast. A lot of shared concerns about water scarcity, drying, extreme heat, extreme weather events. And these are things we really need to tackle together. So our ability to do that and to see that that sort of larger objective together creates the space to work together to see the benefits of talking to the other side. It's not a replacement for for the really hard conversations we need to have about political issues. We certainly are not saying let's just talk about the environment instead of talking about these other things. But in order as societies to be able to have all these other hard conversations we need to have, I think we also need to learn to trust each other. And working together on the environment is one very important way to do that.
So what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve in your between your work on the environment and peace, obviously, but the environment is this catalyst that you have chosen, and with a fabulous side benefit of peace as well. So, what are your goals?
I think that, I mean, so what I mentioned water and I mentioned, climate change. Those are obviously two key themes, two key concerns in the region. We work a lot in the Jordan River Valley because it's a shared ecosystem. Jordan River Valley Basin is shared by Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians. We do a lot of work there, both in terms of economic development and sort of green economy, so green economic development, water solutions, and rehabilitation, restoration of the valley, the basin. The organization now sort of has a big concept called the Green Blue Deal that we came out with a few years ago. And this is sort of big, let's say, the sort of driving agenda for a lot of what we've been doing as an organization. And the Green Blue Deal basically talks about, I mean, it takes, basically looks at climate change and, these different separate commitments that each country, that Israel, Jordan, Palestinian Authority, that we've all made to these international agreements, to these frameworks, that the sort of the changing the sort of the efforts we need to make in terms of mitigation and adaptation to climate change, and identifies the places where we can really cooperate. So there's basically 4 pillars to the Green Blue Deal, and one is sort of cooperation on adaptation in terms of water and energy security. So I can talk about that in a sec, sort of what we're doing there. 2 is also thinking about the politics of water, so advocating for renewed water allocations between Israelis and Palestinians. There's a history here back as part of Oslo. There was an allocation of what's known as the mountain aquifer, so the water resource shared by Israelis and Palestinians. And the Oslo Agreement, if you remember, was supposed to be a temporary agreement, right? So it was supposed to be just a temporary 5-year agreement, and then by the 21st century to have a final status agreement. And here we are, how many years later, over 2 decades later, and still no final status agreement. So a lot has changed on the ground in terms of demographic growth, in terms of Israelis and Palestinians' relative sort of advancements in water reuse, right, and desalination. So Israel gets, Israel is very, very good at reusing water for agriculture, and desalinating water. The Palestinians have been spending all that time under Israeli military occupation, and and haven't been able to make the same strides in terms of those technologies necessarily. So there's relative inequities, and we need to adapt the agreement to the current realities, because we're still sort of allocating water based on something that was signed back in in the mid-90s on the assumption that it would be just a temporary thing. So we do need to advance reallocations of water on a political level. We need to work, the 3rd pillar of this Green Blue Deal is about sort of impact investment in the Jordan Valley. So Jordan Valley is an underdeveloped region, relative or sub-region relative to the wider region. And we're really trying to drive investment in climate smart initiatives and promote sort of job development, job creation through things like, you know, food technologies, water technologies. I can talk about some of the work we're doing there because that's specifically what I work on. And then we also do a lot of work as part of this Green Blue Deal on promoting public awareness, right? Specifically with youth, right? So to do all these things, you know, you need to get people to believe in them, you know, to buy into them. So we sort of work both top down and bottom up, you know, as we say. And this is really the sort of bottom up idea. So it's about building, you know, future leaders, training future leaders in water diplomacy and the skills needed to talk about natural resource sharing and to really get people excited and to learn to trust and to sort of give them the tools to do that. So I can talk about it. Yeah.
I was kind of wondering, you know, with these different groups and with the youth, and do you give them some kind of conflict resolution tools to go over? So when they interact with one another, I mean, just getting, you know, Israeli, you know, Jewish Israeli and Palestinians speaking, even though they live right next to each other, you know, the interactions aren't always there, or at least positive interactions aren't always there. So I'm curious, do you also tackle that so the learning together, the interactions go more smoothly? Is that an issue, or are the people who participate already over that?
I don't think people are over it. And obviously, you know, you know, I think people come to our programs for different reasons. You know, there's a lot of peace programs out there. You know, and really, I think we try to foster skills beyond just sort of, you know, we're not just doing sort of get to know people from the other side programs.
Right.
We really, and I think that is more effective in a way, because when people create things and, you know, and learn about something, you know, something else entirely together, much more effective than just sort of hashing out our, you know, our problems with each other, our narratives. That's really important too, but that's not necessarily what we do, right? So one of the programs, for example, that, you know, that I help run is it's called the Green Social Entrepreneurship Program. And what we do is we teach sort of entrepreneurship, startup 101 skills, if you will. And as part of this program, it's sort of a pre-incubation program, sort of the industry lingo for it. Basically, we're helping incubate new ventures, new startups in sort of the green economy field. You know, things around like fertilizers and bio waste, and they basically look at, you know, at the environmental issues in the region and try to tackle them through startups, and they do it together, right? So they create teams of Israelis and Palestinians and Jordanians working together. These are people who are, you know, in their 20s, 30s, come from all sorts of different backgrounds. And yeah, occasionally, you know, we'll have tensions because things on the ground are dynamic, right? So, you know, we had right now, we've got a lot of tensions in the region, you know, back in May with the Operation Gaza, and sometimes that, sometimes we feel that, you know, with our participants.
Sure.
But I think for the most part, you know, and obviously we can't ignore it. But really what we do is we create a space to talk about things that we care about, because we're not defined just by our being Israelis or Palestinians, right? I mean, the people who participate in these programs. I mean, we've got brilliant engineers from Palestine in this Green Social Entrepreneurs Program. Brilliant people from across the spectrum of Israeli environmental organizations, from people who've done. I think one of the participants, she had her own startup and went to Africa and worked on a solar startup there. And people really come from very varied backgrounds, often having nothing to do with peace or the conflict or that, but they EcoPeace
Right.
is the address to do interesting environmental work, and they understand that to do environmental work in the region, you can't operate just within Palestinian borders or Israeli borders, within the confines of your political sort of territory. So yeah, that's what I'd say about that.
So what would you consider some of your greatest accomplishments of your program?
There are many, right? Or EcoPeace has been around for, so I'm not very good at math, but since '94. So what is that?
Long time.
Many years. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I should know, because so about 28 years, something like that. It's how old I am, so I should know. I mean, many achievements. I think one of the ones that I always like to talk about, is a recent one, which is part of this Green Blue Deal. I mentioned sort of fostering, cooperation on adaptive capacities around water and energy. And one of the big headlines that came out of the region only in the past year is this big agreement signed between the Israeli and Jordanian governments around a water for energy exchange. So basically, Israel is going to give or sell desalinated water to Jordan, which is, I think, the second most water-stressed country in the world, and in return is going to get solar energy from Jordan, because Israel has committed, is not going to be able to meet its commitments to, on renewable energy, its commitments to Paris and Glasgow, just because it mostly doesn't have the land to, for all the solar energy that it needs to build. And Jordan has a lot of land, a lot of sun. And so there's this, we basically, this is modeled on the coal and steel agreement in Europe back in back after World War II between France and Germany, what was sort of the bedrock of today's EU. And the idea of sort of promoting sustainable and healthy interdependencies, right? So, it's a win-win for Israelis and Jordanians. We need their renewable energy, they need our water. You can build, there is also an initiative to build a desalination plant in the south of Jordan, but piping it all the way up to Amman is a lot more expensive than just getting it from, from the Mediterranean coast. And so this agreement was signed in the UAE back, at the end of 2021. John Kerry was there, and EcoPeace has been pushing for this since, I think, 2017, right? So commissioning research and doing sort of advocacy work with both regional stakeholders and getting a sort of coalition from the international community, very high-level diplomats from around the world to sort of stand behind this thing. And that's a huge, it's a huge achievement. It's going to change, it is already really changing Israel's relationship with Jordan for the better. We have it's interesting, how water here is really rising to the top of the agenda, right? I mean, I don't sort of like the, personally, I sort of don't like, attaching security to everything, energy security, food security, water security. We don't need to securitize everything, but this is a region where, security matters, and
Yeah.
water security is critical for Jordan. And energy security is critical for Israel. And we really need each other to succeed here and to adapt to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. So really creating a strong, I think a strong sort of foundation for many more years of of further cooperation on this thing. This is just the beginning of of this water for energy exchange. I think it can grow to much wider scale, and we're working on that as well. Another sort of success of EcoPeace that I'll mention, just because I think it sort of exemplifies the way we work as an organization. So this was about, I don't remember the exact year, but basically the international community, the World Bank, was trying to build the first modern wastewater treatment plant in Gaza, and was really coming up against the sort of the complexities of the region. Israel has blockaded Gaza for many years, military blockade ever since Hamas rose to power there, and also ever since the sort of this phenomenon of terror tunnels from Gaza into Israel. There's been sort of a lot more concern about sort of what's known as dual use, right? So things like concrete getting into the wrong hands and being used to build those tunnels. So the concrete that was needed to build this wastewater treatment plant was being held up because the Israeli government was saying, well, one, we've got a blockade, and two, it could have a military dual use. And so the international community sort of reached out to EcoPeace, said, help us get this done. As an organization, the fact that we have offices, in Israel and Palestine and Jordan means that we have those relationships on the ground, and the sort of the credibility with local actors in all three places, and we're able to get things moving sometimes that others might not be. So the strategy that EcoPeace formulated for dealing with this was really looking at Israeli self-interest, right? I mean, what is the Israeli self-interest in building a wastewater treatment plant in Gaza? And if you look at a map of Israel, you'll see that only very close to Gaza, just a bit north of Gaza, is are both Ashkelon and Ashdod, and home to major Israeli population centers. And so the thinking was, well, if all this waste, this sewage from Gaza is going untreated, then there's probably diseases finding their way to Israeli shores. And so we decided to test the waters on the beach on the beaches there, and for things like cholera and so on, nasty things. And there was sort of an element of serendipity here, because when we took it to the lab, I think the results came back negative. But so, that okay, good idea, you know, thinking about the sort of health concerns. But the lab came back and said, you know, there was an offhand mention that the desalination plant was being shut down. And this is, you know, another interesting thing that we, you know, I think a sort of wise tactic that we take is when we go to labs, we go to the labs that the, you know, that the government also uses, right? Because you don't want to bring scientific evidence to the government, you know, as part of your advocacy, and for them to sort of dismiss it because, oh, well, you know, we don't work with, or we don't believe that's scientists. You want to use the sort of the labs and the scientists that the government trusts, so they can't just dismiss you offhand. And we discovered in that process that the lab is also the lab that works with the desalination plant, and that, you know, someone there mentioned that the desalination plant was being shut down because of this sewage. Something loud from the street, I apologize. So then we filed a Freedom for Information Act, and basically a sort of Freedom of Information request, the Israeli equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act, and discovered that, yes, indeed, the desalination plant was shut down constantly because of this untreated sewage from Gaza, basically clogging it, shutting it down, you know, getting into the system. And the desalination plant, I mean, this is the biggest one in Israel, I think, responsible for something like 15%. I mean, I don't.
Wow.
Of Israel's water supply.
Got someone's attention, huh?
Yeah. And so, I mean, then, you know, I mentioned water security before. This is like seriously threatening Israel's water security. All right. So that's okay. So now we've got an argument, which is if you don't if you don't build a wastewater treatment plant in Gaza, all this untreated sewage is going to threaten Israel's water security. And what do you do with that argument, right? So you sort of, and this is where the sort of the top down and the bottom up approaches come in, because the bottom up approach really is about building coalitions of, you know, of the public, of local communities who are impacted by this, to apply pressure on, you know, on political decision makers. And so this is where, you know, we started doing tours and community town hall events in the local community, and really, you know, explaining and working within the local community to sort of explain the health and, you know, water, energy, you know, impacts of not building this wastewater treatment plant. And it resulted in a letter from all the mayors of, you know, from this, basically what's known as the, you know, the Gaza envelope, or, you know, the region around the area around Gaza, signing a letter to the prime minister, saying, you know, advocating for building this this plant in Gaza, because it, you know, not doing so, failure to do so, you know, harms their constituents, Israeli citizens. And it resulted in the Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, actually coming out and, you know, with a statement, you know, talking about the sort of Israeli security interest in allowing this wastewater treatment plant to go ahead. And so the project was completed, and since then, you know, the international community has completed multiple modern wastewater treatment plants in Gaza. You know, what we see today is that after, you know, after rounds of fighting in Gaza, the Israeli government is pretty quick, try to get electricity up and running again. I think, you know, not out of the kindness of their hearts, but I think really out of seeing the Israeli self-interest in terms of getting these things, you know, like Gazan wastewater treatment plants up and running, so as to not harm Israel's own water security. So I like this story because I think it sort of models how we work sort of with a science focus, right? Like really, we are environmentalists. We bring
Right.
science to the table.
But as humans, I'd love to be a fly on the wall, because the areas that you're mentioning, Ashdod, Ashkelon, we're talking about a mile away from Gaza, who often are getting the missiles from Gaza. And you're talking a lot about entrepreneurs working together, etc. And the new interactions, it must be very interesting and very, do you see this development of engagement with one another as the projects proceed? Any interesting stories about any of that? Because it seems to me that you are, like, as you deal with these entrepreneurs, you're right in the thick of peace issues and the environmental issues, as we've talked about. But I would imagine it could get, with especially the different activities that go on and the different issues, like, the violence and so on, extremely intense at times.
Yeah, I think things get intense at times, but we EcoPeace has been around for all that time. We've got people at the organization who, there's a guy in our Amman office who I think has been working with us 22 years. Really through the highs and lows of regional developments. And yeah, I think especially, you mentioned sort of entrepreneurs, what I work on. The nice thing about working with the private sector is that there's a higher goal, which is the profit margin. Which is not to sound really cynical, but that's again, I think sort of it exemplifies this sort of trying to find win-wins, right? So we're not going to solve everything, but we're very solution oriented.
Right.
And so you're not going to find the panacea, the one big solution for everything. But it's it's the sort of hard slog of little wins that that build, that moderate communities, that build constituencies for peace by getting people to trust each other more, and and to know each other more, and to see that things aren't always black and white, and that you can vehemently disagree. Even inside EcoPeace, there are people from lots of different backgrounds, and lots of different beliefs, and I think individually, people, one state, two state, vote differently, whatever, right? But as an organization, we're committed to solutions, to solutions that especially sort of in the environment and climate domain, and sort of sometimes you really need to cut out the noise, which isn't to say to ignore it, it's but you really sort of need to be very sort of focused on the challenge at hand, and the solution at hand.
And the part, and where you do agree. A lot of peace work isn't, you don't take on the other person's opinion, but you look for the areas where you agree and try to work from there.
Exactly, where you agree and where you can work together. And I think also in terms of we all realize that the implications of not doing something, of inaction on climate and environment are really scary, and so it might be frustrating, might be annoying. It might be, you might need to grit your teeth sometimes to work with someone. But if you don't work with them and you don't tackle these issues, the environment, the climate crisis, the water scarcity crisis, they're not going to sit here and wait for us, to deal with our other shit, as they say. So that's what we do, and I think that's what works about EcoPeace, is that we are very solution oriented. It's really about seeing where there are the win-wins.
Well, let's then talk about some of these projects that you're dealing with more specifically.
I think we've talked about
How,
some of it. We've talked about
yeah.
the water energy. I mean, that's the agreement with Jordan.
Okay.
And we've talked
How about
about
the green social entrepreneurs? Is that
so that's, yeah, I mentioned that. I mean, it's it's basically a pre-incubation program. It runs about 5-6 months. We take 15 Israelis, 15 Palestinians, 15 Jordanians, around in their 20s and to mid 30s, people from all sorts of different backgrounds, but who are interested in gaining entrepreneurship skills, and so and in sort of building a startup, building a venture, and they get training. I mean, we sort of do a whole process that really starts at looking at what are the problems, sort of design thinking workshop, and sort of what are the problems, ideating sort of initial solutions to problems, and then really sort of prototyping initial solutions, testing those, sort of looking at business development models, so sort of learning business development skills, like pricing, operations. So they really get a survey of, like the skills you need to start a business. And sort of there's a learning component to it, and there's also a doing component, which is sort of forming these teams, learning to work together, getting mentoring and coaching. So we have, the picture that you have there is this event that we did in the Dead Sea in Jordan in February, and we brought all the participants. We brought guests, so we had guest judges from 3 different countries, from the Swedish embassy in Amman. 2 of our directors were there. I brought sort of a young serial entrepreneur, and someone from a high-tech company who works on corporate social responsibility. So they were our sort of special guests, and they came to judge. We had sort of a pitch night event, and they pitched their ventures, their projects to this jury, and and awards were handed out, and they got feedback, and we sort of
do you remember what the top winner, what they were proposing, what they were trying to do?
There are a few different groups. One of the groups, for example, was looking at sort of solutions they wanted to take an existing solution from an Israeli company, plastics company, and sort of create this box for urban farming that could also be adapted to like a refugee camp context. So basically sort of promoting farming in for like in refugee camps, something that could be scaled across the region, in Palestine, with Palestinian communities elsewhere. So that was one of the winning groups. We had a few groups that looked at fertilizers, so taking like bio-waste for fertilizers. We had a group that was looking at turning sort of slurry waste, which is waste from the stone quarries. Oh, sorry, that's my dog. In Palestine, it's a huge issue we have with sort of the waste from, it's called slurry. It's basically the sort of the particulates from the stone quarries that gets into the water ecosystems. So taking that sludge and turning it also into fertilizer.
Mhm.
A lot of work on fertilizers, actually. I don't know why that's so popular. But I mean, it was amazing, right? Like these groups, they we had seven projects, at the end. They were constantly, I mean, this is the nature, right, of startups, right, especially at the early stage, to constantly sort of pivot
Mhm.
and reinvent themselves. And what's really cool is that being groups of Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, they sort of trying to tackle regional environmental issues. They learned a lot from each other, just in sort of okay, let's try to pilot this in Palestine. Okay, so then the Israelis are asking the Palestinian what he thinks about the sort of feasibility of this the rollout in specific market in Palestine, and or they want to do the pilot in Israel. So then the Palestinians are learning from or asking the Israeli
Mhm.
sorts of questions about the sort of the Israeli consumer and the Israeli market. And
Mhm.
and you sort of, as they're forming, thinking about like piloting a product or where they might pilot something,
Mhm.
they're learning a lot about their lives and their contexts, and environmental concerns, and sort of weird conversations that you overhear about. They're like teaching each other and researching like waste disposal practices in Palestinian municipalities. And like these are people
Right.
also who like really like to nerd out about this stuff, right? So they're so excited to learn from one another
Uh-huh.
about these issues. And that's really cool. So it was brilliant to really see the process also of them learning from each other, um, as they're trying to create and think about sort of next steps, and iterating these ideas. And it was very challenging also because we had COVID, little thing, you might have heard of it, over in California.
Just a
Um,
bit. So how did that impact your projects?
well, they did most of the program on Zoom or hybrid.
Mhm.
So they got together, the Israelis got together, the Palestinians got together, the Jordanians got together, and they sat in a group, and sort of communicated via Zoom, and then, or they sat at home on their individual monitors and communicated via Zoom.
Mhm.
And only for the last event were we able to actually hold it in person, physically,
Mhm.
which was a real blessing.
When was that?
That was in February.
February.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean, we've obviously had to adapt. I think there's no replacement for in person,
Physical.
physically
Yeah.
being together. I mean, um, there's just no replacement to it. As obviously, I think as an organization, we were pretty prepared. We were, because we're used to working across 3 offices. The whole sort of Zoom remote work thing was
Mhm.
less of a shock. But in terms of programming, um, there's really no replacement to the sort of physical dimension.
Has it provided any the one good thing about all this zooming and online interaction is that usually there's an opportunity to expand your folks who get involved. Have you seen that at all as far as international participation in your projects at all?
So I mean, the last slide I think you have
Okay. Well,
talks about
we're
that.
gonna, okay.
So one of the, if you want to share your screen again, but basically, you know, you know, so one of the sort of the physical in-person things that we do a lot of is taking people on tours, you know, whether it's school groups or teachers, or delegations of business people or diplomats, you know, all these things that, you know, when people were cooped up at home over, you know, during the COVID lockdowns, we weren't able to do. And so that got us thinking, you know, how could we replicate that virtually? And one of our colleagues, sort of very entrepreneurial and techie personality, really spearheaded this project to create a virtual experience we have 2 sites, but both in the sort of the Jordan River Valley where we work, and it's sort of you can think of it as a sort of a virtual tour. You can think of it as a sort of video game. You know, basically it's a metaverse experience. You enter this, I mean, it looks like this, sort of like a video game. You create an avatar, sort of an online virtual version of yourself, and you can experience in one experience, which is we really is about sort of the demise of the Jordan River, so about sort of environmental degradation and the effects of climate change on the ecosystem, and is really a sort of interactive way to learn about and to experience you know, those issues. And then we created another experience that's really geared for, I think, slightly more mature audiences. So, you know, the first experience is something we can really bring to school groups, you know, really scale up our activities, especially now that everyone is so much more technologically literate, you know, and digitally native, and schools have, you know, really gotten a lot more comfortable with working with tools like this. And the sort of the other experiences, we call it the 3 Borders site. So it's 3 farming, 3 agricultural communities, you know, one in an Israeli kibbutz, a Palestinian village, and a Jordanian community. And there we talk about the sort of the also political dimensions of our water realities, the sort of trade-offs on water use, you know, issues around sort of wastewater treatment, and is really basically a way to take, you know, so we do programs, we do like tours for university students who are studying mediation or environmental issues. You know, we've done sessions with folks from Switzerland, from the US, to as part of, you know, classroom activities, to basically experience firsthand, you know, these issues, and there's sort of games within the site where they have to tackle and sort of reckon with some of these complexities. And the idea is really not to sort of, you know, preach at anyone, but to let folks experience, you know, the sort of the issues we work with on a daily basis, and to try to think about solutions. So again, to sort of promote that solution-oriented thinking. So it's a very cool, I mean, it's sort of an adaptive thing. You know, it came out of COVID and needing to take things online. But, you know, now we're rolling it out, and there's a lot of interest from, you know, both sort of schools and teachers here in the region, but also universities and partners all over the world, to take this and use it in different contexts.
It's exciting. Your investment program, what have we here?
So, with the investments, basically, we believe that, getting the private sector on board is critical. There's a lot more interest, first of all, from the private sector in working on, in sort of tackling the same issues, right? Corporate social responsibility, ESG standards. There's a lot more awareness in the private sector today about, the need to step up and sort of cut its carbon emissions, to be socially and environmentally responsible. And there's a lot of really exciting technologies around sort of the water issues, water use, water reuse, food technologies, energy technologies, things that we can really promote and pilot in the region to create jobs, to create sort of joint ventures and cooperation between business communities of Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, to promote skills transfer and tech transfer, across the region. So there's, and there's a lot of excitement and a lot of desire from the private sector. So I think really, what we're doing is harnessing that, first and foremost. This isn't something that we came and said, oh, it would be a great idea to, to get the private sector on board. The private sector, I think, has a lot of desire and really just needs often an organization like EcoPeace to facilitate, because we still have a lot of, there's not a lot of information, often not a lot of there's a lot of sort of hesitation, a lot of barriers, trade barriers to doing business. And so an organization like EcoPeace that has a presence in Israel, Palestine, and Jordan can often really be critical in sort of opening doors and facilitating contacts, and helping sort of reduce barriers and risks. So what we're doing is working with entrepreneurs from all three countries, and with investors both locally and internationally, and international financial and development organizations to promote pilots of all sorts of exciting projects, both in Jordan and Palestine. So things like solar farms and
Yeah, I have to ask, what's the thing with the grasshoppers? It's giving me the creeps.
Yeah. So this is something that I'm working on.
Yeah.
That's a regional project, right? So we have these sort of local pilot projects, and then we also have a regional projects. And there's an Israeli startup, a very, very, very cool Israeli startup called Chagol, which means grasshopper in Hebrew. And Chagol basically takes grasshoppers, which are one of nature's, if not nature's most efficient source of protein, and turn it into basically a powder for use in all sorts of other food products. So it's what's known as a B2B company, right, for other companies. So I won't get into the specifics of why it's so great, but I will mention that it's kosher and halal. So actually, grasshoppers are okay to eat in both Islam and Judaism. They are they're really, really healthy, it turns out. And it turns out they also don't have, this isn't a taste like chicken situation. They're actually pretty neutral in flavor, and have all sorts of properties that make them a great addition to all sorts of other food products. Have a really long
are
shelf life.
They're added for nutrition,
Yeah, for
or
nutritional value, for protein, for and also for food companies add, all sorts of things to, to color and to, for texture, and to bind things, and and there's all sorts of different uses for, for this product. I'll let the company speak for itself, but so anyone who's interested should look them up. But it is, I have to say, I'm very, very convinced by what I know about it. And
this other
so I'll just mention, what we're doing with,
photo.
With Hargol is that we, they basically have a few different steps of, of farming. They have the sort of original breeding, initial breeding, and then the sort of fattening process. And they also grow feed for the grasshoppers. And basically the idea is, as part of the scale up, as part of their growth and scaling up their production capacity, to build farms in Jordan. So what we're trying to do is, help them write a business case and, for building these operations in Jordan, identified a Jordanian partner, and taking this to investors who are very interested. We've really had a lot of interest in this because it's not just a sort of nice regional cooperation story. It really makes a lot of business sense, and I think that's the thing here, is to to really identify also ideas that that have a business case, as well as to really find the sort of the business case in regional cooperation. So
Awesome.
yeah, so that's that's Hagol. That's a chickpea plant. I hope it is. And this is another company that we've been working with, that basically similar, also in the sort of the food tech space, alternative proteins. They extract protein and some other starches and oils from chickpeas, and they're looking to to also, I won't elaborate too much on this one, but also looking to bring a presence locally, and helping them do that. Identified a Palestinian partner, and in the process, the idea would be to also promote livelihoods in Palestine, right? So instead of farmers elsewhere growing these chickpeas, right, to have Palestinian farmers grow the chickpeas, and before they grow the chickpeas, they'd be getting the skills and the sort of technologies to do it in the way the company wants, right? So sort of knitting this this public-private investment that would both promote skills transfer and tech transfer, and create sustainable jobs in the Palestinian agricultural sector. And it's an Israeli company, so there's a dimension here of cooperation, just in that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I should mention, obvious, chickpeas is used for hummus.
it is.
This is so
Uh,
great, healthy snack that everybody enjoys.
Make hummus, not peace. Make hummus, not war.
All right. So I have to ask, I always like to ask a couple personal questions. How did you get interested in the environment and in peace?
So I got interested in peace. I've always been very peaceful. But no, I mean, I think it was mostly, so when I was in college at Yale, I took part in a dialogue group that was formed there. And it wasn't just Israelis and Palestinians, there were also a lot of American Jews and a lot of Arabs from the wider region. So
Mhm.
Egyptians, Jordanians, Emiratis. This was before the Abraham Accords. Folks from Lebanese, and we'd get together once a week and
Mm.
usually pick sort of a topic, or
Mhm.
someone would share, and people would react, and sometimes it would get very heated, and we had sort of a few tense moments, but for the most part, it was that was one of my communities, and
Mhm.
um, you know created a lot of beautiful friendships, lasting friendships there, and it really got me curious about the sort of this space,
Mhm.
and that's what sort of sent me to do a master's in Middle Eastern studies. I sort of I when I signed up for my master's, I thought I wanted to study the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When I
Mhm.
got there, I realized that that there was so much more to the Middle East than the conflict.
Mhm.
And I did coursework in lots of other things that
Mhm.
have nothing to do with our little plot of land. And but when I came back here, I'd also been doing some work with the World Bank, and on sort of on non-climate things like political analysis of various places in the Middle East and Africa, and sort of there somehow got into this sort of climate security space, and then started doing some stuff for the UN around climate security, and that's sort of how I came into this climate environment thing. And sort of learned the lingo around that, and really came to see. I mean, I think what sort of brought me to the intersection of the two, and to EcoPeace, was really the desire to work in a space where there's still momentum, where I can really feel like I can make a difference, and sort of not just rehearse the sort of the tired platitudes. I think there's really a lot of potential through the acute sort of crisis of climate change, and of water scarcity, to build coalitions and to build bridges, that yeah, things that have just really been stalled for a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that, I mean, that's what brought me here, and
Okay. Um, for your last question, I wanted to ask, what's the next area of the environment where you and all your colleagues will focus to improve? What's the hot environmental area that you can cooperate with each other?
I mean, so there's, water. The water issue is not going away.
Yeah,
So we're
for
thinking a lot
sure.
about, we're thinking a lot about,
It's a hot
um,
topic in a desert, right?
yeah, yeah. So a lot of sort of cooperation around cross-boundary streams, and sort of specific challenges around specific sorts of pollution. I mentioned the slurry
Mm-hmm.
before, from the stone quarries,
Mm-hmm.
from things like slaughterhouses, and organic waste, and then it gets into wastewater treatment plants and creates a whole mess. And so really identifying solutions from the private sector, maybe around some of those challenges. Um, so that's a big one. Getting the sort of the energy, the alternative, or the sort of renewable energy space, is really exciting, and and the needs there are just growing, and especially now that we've got this Israel-Jordan water for energy deal, there's a lot of momentum and there's a lot of credibility for EcoPeace as an organization to work and to bring more regional players into this cooperation on energy, and so really looking at the wider region, and and how we can harness the the natural resources, especially the sun, and the sort of large plots of unused desert land in the region to create a lot of renewable energy for Europe, especially now with Ukraine, for example. See that Europe needs an alternative source of energy. A lot of that can come from the Middle East, where there's a lot of work now being done to connect electricity grids, across the world. So to connect Europe and the Middle East, Europe and Africa, and how can we harness that, and to also build bridges around the energy space. So that's another big initiative or thing that we're starting to think about.
Fabulous. So thanks so much for your time today, Yuval. It's great to hear about an organization that brings together these parties normally thought of as having strained relationships, and because of their mutual need to use the limited environment responsibly, they put aside differences and work together in a more peace-filled atmosphere. Next week on May 17th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, we'll have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Norbert Goldfield, founder and executive director of Healing Across the Divides. Healing Across the Divides is an organization comprised of American medical professionals who bring together and assist their Israeli and Palestinian counterparts in creating bridge building programs that improve the health of both Israelis and Palestinians. As you can see, many people are working very hard to improve the lives of Jewish, Arab, and Palestinian people in the Middle East, promoting cooperation. And Peace with Penny strives to get the word out that there is hope for peace in the region. Next week, we'd love for you to join us again. We hope that the situation will calm down in Israel and that there'll be better news for the people of Ukraine and Russia. For now, we'll leave you as we pray that everyone will someday live in peace, shalom, and salam.